Today I'd like to talk about how we can use auxiliary notes when composing a melody. Last time we talked about how we can use the passing notes. So you use a passing note when you have a leap of third from one note of a chord to another. So this is where you have an interval of a third, which is C and A. So this is interval of a third, so I'm adding the passing note in between, which is the note between the chord tones C and A. So I'm adding B, right, next to C as a passing note. Now we're going to talk about how we can use the auxiliary note. So auxiliary note is also called the neighbor notes. So you can use auxiliary notes when you have a repeated note or when you have a long note. So let's just look at the soprano here. So you see the soprano C is being repeated, right? So there's a C and then there's another C. So I can add auxiliary note, upper auxiliary notes. So stepping up from C, right, and then turning into two quavers, right? So this is upper auxiliary notes because it's going up from the main note C. All right, so now I'm trying to use another upper auxiliary notes here as the tenor is being repeated. So I'm adding upper auxiliary notes here from F, stepping up, all right, and turning into two quavers, all right, and that's how I added the upper auxiliary notes. And this is where the alto is being repeated. And so now I'm trying to use lower auxiliary notes here. So F down to E. Okay, all right. But when you're using the lower auxiliary notes, you have to be careful because if the main chord contains either root or dominant, eventually the lower auxiliary notes should move up. So it should be raised by semitone. So E to F. All right. So this chord is F major chord, which contains the root. All right. So you can use lower auxiliary notes from the note, but eventually must be raised by semitone. So now you see that this is lower auxiliary note, and then it's moving up to the next chord, right? So when you're using auxiliary notes, the lower auxiliary notes from the chord where you have a root or the dominant must be raised by semitone. So auxiliary notes add interest, especially for the inner part. Auxiliary note is a perfect way to add interest, especially for inner parts from four-part vocal style, tenor and alto. But you have to be really careful when using auxiliary notes because it can easily create the consecutive fifths. So here's what you can do. Can you find the consecutive fifth here? Even though the main part is not the fifth, but because of the upper auxiliary note, it creates the consecutive fifths. So G to D is the fifth. All right, and then it follows by the fifth interval going down. So both parts going down, so they're moving in a parallel motion, which creates the consecutive fifths. So in that case, you might want to use the lower auxiliary notes in that case, right? Okay, and then here, can you find the consecutive fifths here too? All right, main part, also the main part is not the interval of fifth, but because of the lower auxiliary note, that creates consecutive fifths. So E to B is the fifth, and that follows by the fifth interval, right? And so in that case also creates the consecutive fifths. In that case, you can use the upper auxiliary notes, right? So instead of using the lower auxiliary notes, you can simply use the upper auxiliary notes. That's what you can do to get rid of the consecutive fifths.